Hello and welcome to the German Empire Bowls channel. I hope you all are having a great day. And I would like to welcome you all to part 1 of our Imperial Eagle series, where what if the German Empire and her allies won the Great War? I do hope you enjoy the video. The year is 1950. The Great War has been going on for nearly a year. In the West, in France, the stalemate between the Entente and the Central Powers continues, with trench warfare taking the lives of thousands. In the East, the German and Austrians have pushed the Russians back and are pushing towards Warsaw, but it has also turned into a stalemate. On May 7th, 1915, something happened that would conflict America on the war situation. A German submarine sunk the RMS Lusitania, killing hundreds of Americans that were on board. The U.S. Senate was very divided on the situation. On one hand, the Americans died by the hands of the Germans' unrestricted submarine warfare. But it was also pointed out that the ship was in a war zone carrying weapons and ammunition for the Entente. When the Americans also found out that Britain knew this would happen, they decided to demand an apology from both sides. The German Empire in Berlin apologized and promised not to continue the unrestricted submarine warfare. Britain didn't apologize that much and claimed that they didn't know about the situation, even though there was evidence that pointed out that they did. This would cause relations to break down between the US and the United Kingdom. In the Kingdom of Italy, the nation was also planning on joining the war. Italy was originally on the side of the Central Powers, but they also wanted old Italian lands that were held by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The German Empire didn't want another enemy, so they forced the Austro-Hungarian Empire to give up these lands so that Italy can join the war, which they did. Italy was grateful and joined the war on May 26, 1915, on the side of the Central Powers, opening a new front in France and the Alps region. Bulgaria also saw the military might of the Central Powers and also hoped to gain the old lands that they lost in the Second Balkan War. So, they also joined the war and helped invade Serbia with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Within a few months, all of Serbia was invaded by the two countries, and Serbian troops occupied Albania and northern Greece to continue the war effort. The German Empire and its allies were very pleased with how the war was going so far, but the stalemate still needed to be broken. By winter, the Polish region and southern Baltic regions had been completely taken by the Central Powers, and civil unrest in the Russian Empire was starting to be more and more of a problem for the Russian Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II. So on February 19th, 1916, the Russian Empire surrendered to the Central Powers. In the treaty, which was called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the region of Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic region, and Finland were to become puppet states to Germany, and they would be given new names such as the Kingdom of Poland, the Kingdom of Ukraine, the Royal Baltic Union, and the Kingdom of Finland. The Russian Tsar was forced to flee after the treaty was signed, as Russia fell to revolutions from the Republicans called the Duma. They tried to take control of the Russian government as Tsar Nicholas fled. But the arrival of Lenin, who arrived in Petrograd during the chaos of the war, would rally up Bolsheviks and communist followers against the Duma. This would cause the Russian Civil War to begin. Tsar Nicholas II and his family were allowed to stay in Berlin, as Kaiser Wilhelm and him were cousins and had a strong relationship together before the war began. So he was safe. With the surrender of Russia, the German Empire could now move all of its forces that were fighting on the Eastern Front to fight in the Western Front. This was very bad news for France, who has been calling on more support ever since the German attacks on Verdun. The British tried to break through the German lines at the Somme, but these attacks were proven unsuccessful. To try and double their efforts on starving Germany out of the war, The North Sea blockade was doubled, and the British began sinking any ships heading into German waters or looked like that they were heading into German waters. On September 8, 1916, a British warship sunk an unidentified merchant vessel that was heading into German territory. It turns out it was an American ship carrying food and toys for German children and their families. The U.S. demanded an apology from Britain and money for the incident. Britain said that even if the ship wasn't sunk, it still wouldn't have let the ship through. So, the apology and the demand for money was denied. Many U.S. congressmen and senators said that the British blockade was a cruel and wrong thing, and claimed that thousands of children were starving with their parents. America told Britain to end the blockade or at least loosen it and allow trade in Northern Europe to continue. Britain refused, so the United States of America declared war on Great Britain and joined the Central Powers. Even though the United States joined the war, they can't send any troops in Europe to help the German Empire, as the British Navy was too strong in the Atlantic. So, America only focuses on invading British Canada. The United States Army rapidly takes Vancouver and Victoria, and the Canadian defenses at Winnipeg are overwhelmed and are forced to retreat. But in the east, the Canadians hold the line long enough to retreat across the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence River is more than 1 kilometer wide, so it serves as a good defense. Great Britain also sends as many troops to Ontario and Quebec to defend Canada against the American war machine. But this choice of sending troops over to Canada has weakened their fight in France a little bit, giving German soldiers a much more morale boost and a lot of more victories. Not enough to break through the trench lines, but just enough to break the French morale. On March 9th, 1917, the Entente begins the naval offensive to try and break through the German lines once again. It turns into a devastating defeat for the Entente, losing millions on both sides in the defeat. On March 9th, 1917, the Japanese and Australian forces do take the U.S. Philippines, so the Entente does have victory in Asia so far. On July 31st, 1917, the Battle of Rheims begins and lasts throughout the whole year, proving indecisive. During so, on August 10th, 1917, British and Canadian forces, under the command of General Sir Arthur Currie, launches an offensive to retake lands of the St. Lawrence River. The British Navy also begins bombing U.S. coastal cities such as Boston. The Siege of Boston became one of the most brutal sieges in the Great War. On October 24th, 1917, the Italians break through the French lines in the Alps and are ready to invade and capture the city of Marseille, which they do in a few months. In Russia, Lenin and his Bolsheviks finally seize power in the west and push the Duma back to the east, past the Ural Mountains, which separates Western Russia from Eastern Russia, which is Siberia. On November 8, 1917, Japanese and British forces are able to capture the U.S. Hawaii, giving Japanese and the British more victory in the Asian front. In Canada, the British launch gas attacks at American forces. This tactic does cause the Americans to fall back as they are not used to gas warfare. But after the pass of the U.S. Selective Service Act, American forces are bolstered in the millions. On February 5th, 1918, American forces crossed the St. Lawrence River near Troyes. In Western Canada, U.S. forces are able to overwhelm Canadian forces, and 1/3 of the Canadian territories in the West are occupied by America. In the Alaskan front, Many skirmishes are taking place between Canadians and Americans, but little to no movement is taking place there, as it is mostly wilderness and is far too cold to try and take any grounds on both sides. On March 1st, 1918, General Pershing is able to capture Toronto. Montreal and Quebec City surrenders to the American forces as well. This is where most of the Canadian population lives, and the main Canadian government decides to surrender to the US. The Canadian campaign has been won for the Central Powers. Thanks to the resources in the German puppet states of the Kingdom of Poland, Ukraine, the Royal Baltic Union, and Finland, Germany's food supply and manpower begins to rise more, despite the North Sea naval blockade. The Entente forces decide to do one last offensive, codenamed Operation Bonaparte. On March 31st, 1918, Entente forces attack at Saint-Quentin. The Entente forces are able to win and are able to advance over 60 kilometers. However, after the brutal fighting, the offensive is halted as the Entente can't resupply their troops as much, as they're slowly losing resources by the day. On April 3rd, Italian forces are able to capture the city of Nimes and Barg, and the French forces in that area begins to fall back to more defensive positions. On the 15th of May, 1918, the Entente tries to continue their offensive, but their resources and manpower are extremely low. The Germans halt the offensive once again and began to counterattack. By the 20th of June, 1918, Entente forces have retreated back to their starting lines. Casualties between May and June are 380,000 men. Anti-war marches became more frequent in the Entente, and the morale in the Entente army began to fail. French forces were on the verge of feeling mutiny. On August 24th, 1918, the German forces are easily able to knock back the Entente armies. By September 12th, 1918, Paris became surrounded and sieged. Entente members now know that there is no hope in winning the war, as Paris falls on September 20th, 1918. The Entente forces surrender, and the Great War, or Weltkrieg, is finally ended. The peace treaty is signed in Versailles. It starts for the German Empire. The German Empire annexes all of Luxembourg, Portuguese Angola, and Mozambique. This is an editor's note. I can't really pronounce some of these names. Sorry about that. As well as British Uganda, Nigeria, and Kenya. Germany annexes the Belgian Congo and all of the Ivory Coast territories, as well as the coast of Ghana. The British also must give up British Zambia. This creates one giant German colony that is called German Mittelafrika. The German Empire also annexes British Papua on the Papua Island in the Pacific Ocean, as well as French Madagascar, as well as northern French Indochina. The German Empire also annexes the British Falklands and French Guiana in South America. France must pay 90 million francs to the Central Powers as war reparations and has to give up the rest of Alsace-Lorraine to the German Empire. And Belgium becomes a satellite state to the German Empire, but the king still remains in charge of Belgium, because he and Kaiser Wilhelm II were relatives. Ireland also becomes an independent kingdom from the British. The British must also pay war reparations to the German Empire as well. As for Bulgaria, Bulgaria annexes southern Siberian territories and some minor Romanian territories as well. Bulgaria also annexes Greek Macedonia, as well as the island of Crete, which they lost in the Second Balkan War. The Ottoman Empire annexes all Greek islands in the Aegean Sea, as well as the Suez Canal, and minor territories in Egypt. The Arabian rebels, led by Lawrence of Arabia and King Ali of the Hijaz, were able to push the Ottomans back to Jerusalem. So an agreement was made between them in a separate treaty called the Treaty of Istanbul, where lands were given to Arabia, as well as Baghdad, which became the Arabian capital. King Ali would be in charge of the new Arabian Empire and would be given the title as Emperor or Sultan of the newly established Arabian Empire, with Lawrence of Arabia being his advisor and diplomat. As for the Kingdom of Italy, Italy would annex some lands in British Egypt, as well as North African French territories, all the way to the city of Constantine. Italy also annexes French Corsia and the French Alps region. France also has to pay war reparations to Italy, and so does Britain. The Austro-Hungarian Empire annexes all of Montenegro and some minor territories in western Romania. Austria-Hungary also annexes the rest of Serbia as punishment for starting this terrible war. Romania must also pay war reparations to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Finally, the United States of America annexes the Canadian provinces of Columbia and Yukon, I believe that's how you say it, and all territories east of the St. Lawrence River. U.S. also annexes territories in the provinces of Ontario, which would have U.S. territories encircle the Great Lakes, having full control of those lakes. The province of Quebec would become the Kingdom of Quebec and would become a puppet state to the United States of America. The United States of America also annexes southern French Indochina and all the British islands in the Caribbean and in Asia. The treaty is signed on September 30th, 1918. The Weltkrieg is over with a Central Powers victory, and that's where I'll end this story off here. I do hope you guys like this little alternate history scenario so far. The maps don't look entirely accurate as how I want them, but what you gonna do? It's a modern regions app, and my computer's broken, and I'm hoping to get a new one for my birthday, which, by the way, is coming up very soon. Yay! I've also created my very own subreddit called r/German Empire Ball, where you can post your alternate history scenarios or ideas, and I might possibly, show them off, on the YouTube channel. I did hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye, my friends, and I will see you next time.